Welcome to the Chase Down Podcast, part of the Cavs media family. I'm your host, Justin Rowan. The Chase Down is presented by Fubo TV. Watch over 100 channels of live sports and TV for half the cost of cable. There's no contract and no commitment. Try for free at FuboTV.com. Guess who's back, folks? Carter Rodriguez making his return to the podcast. Carter, how you doing, buddy?
Bleary-eyed, jet-lagged, and ready to talk about the Cleveland Cavaliers. I'm good. I got back yesterday afternoon. Felt my worst then. Have just been in a stupor all day. But one more night of sleep, I think I'll be right as rain.
Well, we appreciate you toughing it out. We had a lot of technical difficulties getting this one going. I think I might have a dead
None
computer,
for me,
so
stunningly.
that you know what, you're running the cleanest out of all of us, and I'm happy to hear it. I'm happy to see that you're back.
Japan
I'm
was
happy everything
lovely.
went well. Japan was lovely.
Yes, amazing city. I ate very, very well. Produced a very fun Pokemon event while I was there, and now I'm back in the saddle, baby.
Happy to hear it, and I'm happy to welcome our guest back to the podcast. Bobby Manning is back on the podcast, here to talk some Cavs, here to talk some Celtics. You might know him from CLNS Media, Dome Theory Podcast, Garden Report. Bobby, how you doing, buddy?
Hey, appreciate Carter doing it tonight so we could get together here. I'm obviously about to go away myself, so let's talk some Celtics Cavs. This is obviously my favorite spot to come talk basketball. Appreciate you guys.
I like how you said, obviously about to leave myself, like the listeners are listening in on our pre-show talk.
They were. Fun fact, we were streaming the whole time. No, we weren't.
Yeah, we've just been going live this whole time. Bobby, I want to start things off, and we've been doing some of these team previews. We talked about the Bucks. We talked about the Knicks last week, which Carter caught a few strays during that podcast. But we start things off just asking how you feel about your team, the Boston Celtics, after the playoff run that they have. Did them not advancing as far as the previous year impact how you viewed the team? And did you feel any changes were required as a result of where they finished last year?
Yeah, no doubt. How could you not, after watching them go down 3-0 to an 8 seed, and obviously an 8 seed that took down some really good teams on the way, ended up going to the finals and putting up a decent fight there. Had a bunch of guys step up. So that Heat team obviously proved me wrong. I didn't believe in them all year, and they were an amazing playoff team last postseason. But to go down 3-0 when you're the better team, it was just unacceptable. And I know they made the comeback. I know that saved the coach's job in all probability. But it was clear they needed some shakeup internally. And yeah, I was willing to listen on Jaylen Brown. I was willing to listen a year ago when the Kevin Durant stuff was happening, and I don't think they considered it this time around. They went with Marcus Smart, and they took a very calculated risk. I think one that makes a lot of sense statistically, on paper, in a basketball sense. But this team's been one of the most talented teams in the NBA over the last couple of years here. Talent was not the issue. They had a third very talented player here. You're still questioning the intangibles here. The room, the inner dynamics between the stars on the team and their ability to connect. And of course, the coaching as well. I think after that postseason run, you still have to question that going into this season as well. So I have a lot of questions about it. They made some interesting moves that I think were very creative and could work out exceptionally and prove to be the fix for what's gone wrong the last couple of years. But I don't love losing Smart for on and off court reasons. And I have questions about Porzingis. I do.
I want to ask you first. We're going to jump into the on-court stuff in a minute because I think Justin and I both feel a certain way about the Celtics offseason. However, I do, before I kind of voice my pessimism about the choices that they've made, I do kind of want to ask you a bit about the cultural side of things, because this is something the Cavs have been going through as of late, where they signed Ricky Rubio 2 seasons ago and ended up bringing him back this year to be kind of that cultural tone setter. And as we kind of went into this offseason, they lost a guy like Lamar Stevens, who was like a huge part of their culture in their locker room. And something I said kind of to guard against that is hey, at some point like when you're trying to become a title contending team, when you're moving into that phase, like your best players have to be your culture setter. Like the Spurs weren't the best culture in the league because of Rasho Nesterovic. They were because of Tim Duncan. So like, what do you think of that take? That like, you know, like are you as worried about the hit that they're going to take in losing Marcus? Are you kind of the opinion that if the Jays can't get you there culturally, you probably have bigger problems on your hands?
Yeah, it's a fair argument, and I think that's a big reason they made the move they did. In fact, given that the Brogdon trade broke down and that Smart ended up subbing into the new trade, I think there was a real chance Smart was going to be gone regardless here, because I just think they wanted to shake up the room. Yeah, and you know, it's worth trying, right? Because if you go through this whole Brown and Tatum era, not trying to mix up things at all, you'll never know what it would have looked like if you did shake up things. And obviously the top two talented players, Carter, as you said, are going to be the driving force in a lot of that. I just question whether temperamentally both of those guys are going to be the really vocal, outspoken, responsible leaders that they're being pushed to be in this move. You know, they're both naturally quiet guys, and I think they've gotten better at embracing the leadership qualities, but a lot of the, you know, talk out of last season is we had a great year. You know, it was tough, and there's a million excuses that I think are valid coming out of it. But at the very top, you still want to see some anger, some disappointment, some fire over them losing, some disappointment, I think, is the biggest thing. And with each passing postseason loss in big spots, there's still a lot of, you know, oh, we did a lot of good things this year. You know, it was a tough season, or we had this excuse or that excuse. You know, Smart, Grant, guys like that they've lost here were ones who were more likely to say, you know, this isn't acceptable. You know, Smart had one of the wildest call outs of the coaching, and I still don't really know what he was getting at with it, but when he said after the you know, game 6 win in Philly, Joe's been getting killed, and rightfully so, which is one of the wildest things I've ever heard in a press conference. But he was willing to speak his mind. You know, a couple of years ago, everyone remembers he called out Jalen and Jason. Like when Ime, and you know, we can talk about that as well, you know, Ime's departure after last year, firing, there was this kind of atmosphere internally of collective accountability. Like anyone could call anyone out. There was a lot of that year, and it started and ended with email all the time. Last year, it was a lot of optimism and positive talk after tough losses, and I think letting things slide a little bit in terms of things that weren't as tight. And Al Horford talked about this after the year too, that they should have tightened up earlier, and they really weren't on top of in the new atmosphere under Joe.
Yeah, I want to ask about, because the way you're talking about this team right now is of one that's like kind of not hitting its ceiling. That might be a little disappointing, and I understand that impulse. And like something that I found interesting with this Celtics team is, by all accounts, the Jays era has been a wild success, a finals appearance. Like, was it 4 conference finals trips now? Yeah. For you know, a still very young core. Like you're like, for most guys that at those guys' age, you're kind of hoping to have gotten to 1 by now. And so like, how do you square the idea that the pain of not getting all the way across the finish line feels bigger, despite the fact that, like, you know, by, you know, in any era, this is a pretty darn good team that's had a really good run of sustained excellence. They really only had one meh year in the Jason Tatum era.
Well, that's the Killers. They have had a fantastic team, and I think that, and of course the first East Finals, only Brown was there, and he was just coming into the league in his rookie year. But that says a lot about the era they've both entered into here. Tatum played in East Finals in his rookie season. Brown did as well. They've had outstanding all-star players around them for this whole ride. And when they've become the stars, they've had, I think, excellent supporting cast outside of the one year you mentioned, which was a disaster year. But I think that's sort of, and, you know, there's been talked about a little bit too around them. There's an expectation that it's going to happen, or it's going to happen eventually. And, you know, I think I've heard Tatum say as much too. Like when it came to the MVP last year, he's like, yeah, I got, you know, 10, 15 years to go to win that. And like, I think there is a little bit of an attitude internally that, you know, we'll get there when we'll get there. And, you know, I can't exclude Smart from that either. I asked Smart after they lost game 7, about the path forward and the next steps. And he's like, yeah, that's the beauty of it. We get to come back and do it again next year. And of course, I knew that was going to come back to bite him, and it did. Like, there was just always this attitude, I think, in this locker room that we'll get it next year. We'll get it next year. And that next year is promised. And you saw after the finals appearance, I think this team believed very strongly that they were just going to be back in the finals. And they weren't. Like, they let a lot of regular season games slide. They let home court advantage slide, which didn't kill them because the Bucks ended up losing anyway. But I didn't think that was a great thing for them to do. And they just weren't the tightest team last year. I thought it was a fairly loose group. And, the season before, you saw they were one of the tightest, highest functioning, locked in teams in the league. And it's tough not to look at the coaching in that sense. And listen, Joe, all the excuses in the world that are thrown around when it comes to him are 100% valid. He took over days before training camp. He had no time to implement his system. He had assistants who were with 1 foot in the door, 1 foot out. They all pretty much left after the season. I think it's all valid. But if you're still looking at last year, not so much the X's and O's and the timeouts and all that. I think Joe, from a basketball standpoint, is very sound. And there are certain things about his philosophies on the court that some people don't like. And, I've had problems with it at times too. With him, it's more, you'd ask him after games, like, what has to get better? And even after these brutal losses, it'd still be, we played great. There were a lot of great things we did tonight. And I think that sort of tone just carried down throughout the roster all year, that after bad losses and going a game too long in the Hawks series and going down 3-2 in the Philly series, that everything was going to be all right until, you saw everything shift after they went down 3-0 in the Heat. It was, Joe was on the podium saying he takes all responsibility. Wick was in the locker room cussing everybody out, and they responded, which, I think was admirable. But in the end, they still lost Game 7 in a big way. And to me, it was still a really disappointing series. So yeah, you do acknowledge, I think, in keeping Tatum and Brown together, that this core has allowed you to be in the mix every year. And you obviously need a lot of luck and circumstance to actually win it all. But at the same time, I do think there's some glaring issues, and maybe some of it did go back to Smart. The fact that they identified that and made that move could work out. But I also think, you've seen a handful of guys have come and gone be that scapegoat. And this year, I think Grant filled that role at times. Everyone could look at Grant and be like, Grant, what the hell are you doing? And then Smart would take the shots everyone, would be pissed off about, and be like, Smart went 3 for 10. But those guys, I think the veterans on this team really got that nothing's promised year in and year out. And I still look at Brown and Tatum as the ones who have done nothing but win from start to finish in their careers so far. And look at them and say, do they really realize how important this next year or two are going to be here?
Yeah, I find it really interesting that you're talking about kind of the perceived long runway that the Boston Celtics have, right, with this young core. And I think that's something that we're trying to find that balance too when it comes to the Cavs, right? Because you have this foundation of Darius Garland, Evan Mobley, Jared Allen, all those guys are under contract for a long time. Then you bring in Donovan Mitchell, right? When obviously he's got a shorter timeline when it comes to contract, but you feel like you have a long runway. And I think it just goes to show that things can get stale, and you always have to be looking for ways to improve the roster and to shake things up and make sure that you're trending in that right direction. Because, if you keep assuming that you're just going to have internal growth and that's going to bridge the gap, sometimes that doesn't cover it all, right? You need to bring in those supporting pieces that improve the context for those core pieces to have that growth. Before we move on, I want to circle back to something you've said, and you've alluded to it a couple times. You said that if the original Porzingis trade went down, or Malcolm Brogdon's traded to the Clippers, you still kind of foresaw Smart getting traded. I want to know what type of deal you thought that was going to be, and if I'm correct in that interpretation to begin with. But did you just kind of feel like they needed to make that shakeup and it was going to occur no matter what?
I think it would have happened no matter what. And I don't know exactly what deal it would have been. Obviously, from the Grizzlies standpoint, their GM talked about them having conversations prior to that, which, I don't think anyone's under the illusion that at 11 o'clock they called the Grizzlies and threw something together on a whim. Those conversations.
There was probably, that's not how this happens.
Those conversations happen. Maybe it would have been a Tyus Jones situation, and he ended up being, valuable to the Wizards in a way that pulled all those different deals together in the end. That's a possibility, obviously, there. There's a couple other contracts on the Grizzlies that might have made sense, but I don't know exactly what deal it could have been. I just know that they didn't just pivot from Brogdon to Smart. Like, I think there's a real possibility. And even after Smart got traded, you still saw reporting for weeks to come that they were looking to move Brogdon as well. And I think that suddenly becomes maybe the biggest question going into the season for the Celtics, is what his status is and how secure his future is with the team here, from a physical standpoint and from a, mental standpoint in terms of a commitment to his role in the team after he almost got dealt. So
when the Clippers are turning you down for medical reasons, that's a bit of a red flag. I think that's definitely one of the bigger questions, and one that I have on the rundown. But we do play a game here on the podcast, which is, why is Justin wrong? And so far, Carter has never proven me wrong. He's never got me to change my mind. But I think that Boston got worse this summer. Tell me why I'm wrong.
I don't need to prove him wrong because I agree on this one.
Bobby, prove me wrong. Prove me wrong. Make the case on why Boston got better.
So, as many questions as I have about Porzingis, the one I don't is the defense. I think he's going to make this team so much better defensively just because of the style that they were trying to play last year with Al Horford in the drop, who's obviously 6'8", 6'9", not the best rim protector in the world and a little bit older. You're replacing him in the drop with a 7'3" guy with all the length in the world, still in his prime, somewhat athletically here. And he's going to dominate. And he was great last year defensively, both, blocking shots, but also just playing in that drop and deterring shots around the rim too, which is what under Mazzulla, the Celtics want to do. They want to take away threes. They want to take away looks at the rim. And I think now this roster has so much length that they're going to switch less. They're going to play a much different style defensively than they did with Ime a couple of years ago. But I think they actually have the personnel to play this style that they want to now, between Jalen and Jason, Porzingis, and I think they're probably going to start with Rob at the 4, 5, whatever you want to call it. And they're just going to have length at every position. Derek White's still a big, long defender at the point, even with Smart gone. So, again, they're going to switch less. They're going to cover space more than I think they use brute strength and versatility 1 through 5 to defend positions like they did before. But they're going to have the 7'3" guy at the rim, helping them be more aggressive on the wing. They're going to force more turnovers, which I know is a huge priority for this team going into this year. And I think this defense will be back in play to be number one. It'll be a different style. It'll be a different look. But I think it will lead to a similar result to what we saw a couple of years ago. So that, to me, is the biggest reason I'm excited about Porzingis.
It's one of the biggest teams in the league positionally, right? Like, especially, do you think they're going to start one of those? I guess they kind of have to, right? They have to start.
Yeah, you're talking about Rob or Al.
Rob or Al. I think what I'm saying is they have to go double big, right?
Yeah,
just basically the way their
plan.
team's made.
Yeah, and they can go smaller sometimes with Brogdon at the 2, but I think to start games and for the most of games, they'll go with Rob and Porzingis, and then some looks with Horford and Porzingis.
What that does for them, I would surmise, is it does allow Robert Williams to go back into that roamer role, that free safety role, with, I would argue a better drop big in the form of Porzingis. I guess my question to you here is the depth. I think we've seen the last couple of years that the league has just gotten so darn good that the difference between, the 10th best player and the 15th best player isn't that big anymore. But if you're playing guys who really shouldn't be on the floor, it's hard to have successful lineups. What do you think about the Celtics depth pieces? Guys, let's say 7 through 11 in the rotation. And are they going to be good enough? Are we gonna be looking at lineup data and going, yep, every time O'Shea Brissett's in there, we're getting killed? Just picking a name out of a hat.
They weren't an exceptionally deep team last year either. Obviously, you still have the 6th man of the year in Brogdon, who I think is the biggest question mark in that sense. But 7 will be Horford, who, at $10 million now, even if you look at his postseason and say he missed a lot of shots and didn't fare well defensively, he'll be back at the 4. Still shot 44% from 3 last year. So I think him coming off the bench potentially is a nice plus in the front court. And you can look at him as the Grant from a year ago, whereas he didn't have that extra big in the fold last year. It was Mike Muscala, who never played. So I think in that sense, you got better there. Wing depth, I think at least during the regular season, you feel good about Pritchard giving you some minutes at the 2 where needed, who did, play every night a couple of years ago and is a good shooter and I think an underrated defender. And then Sam Hauser, who I thought during the regular season gave them some really solid minutes, shooting over 40% from 3. Finished number 1 in defensive rating for whatever that's worth, but didn't get killed on that end the way a lot of people thought he would. And I think, maybe he's not a playoff guy, but Brown and Tatum end up eating most of those minutes come playoff time anyway. Now, when you're talking injuries at any one of those positions, I do think you start to worry a little bit. Like O'Shea Brissett and Delano Banton are both here as minimum guys who I don't foresee being super consistent in regular roles, but those guys can be inning eaters during the years too, which is what they're going to need. They need to rest and scale back the minutes. That's the second biggest thing I like about the Porzingis deal is there's just not as much of a load on Horford. There's an obvious replacement if Rob gets hurt, who, is right there and available and playing from day one. It's not just one of these, ancillary role guys who are stepping in and trying to fill that spot. So again, on paper, I think a lot of how this team's built makes sense. It's just going to be how it connects, how the 3 stars connect to each other offensively, how the offense functions. I'm very excited about Derek White stepping up in that sense, but depth, it's a regular season question. They might even bring Blake back, who I liked last year for depth purposes during the regular season. And then come playoff time, it's your 6-7 guys as it always is.
I mean,
ahead,
it's
Justin.
not always that way. We didn't have 6-7 guys that we felt confident in last season.
But sometimes it can dwindle down. Yeah.
Oh yeah, it can dwindle down in a hurry. But that
it's
was
like you're
obviously
bombing a stand-up set. It just kind of starts paring down.
Yeah.
But that was obviously a massive point of emphasis for the Cavs, and they went out and added, Max Strus, George Niang, Ty Jerome, even Damian Jones. We're interested to see what he can bring. From an outsider's perspective, what did you make of the Cavs summary and kind of their efforts to solve some of their bigger needs?
They did a ton with limited resources. I was super impressed with what they did. Love Niang. Thought the Sixers underutilized him, and he gives shooting at that wing spot. This team, we talked about it all the time, Justin, on this show and my show. They did not have consistent play at the wing, and it's probably going to be production by committee at that spot. Like Niang's not always going to be a great matchup against opposing teams if he's getting targeted defensively, but I think he'll be steady at that spot. Strus will probably be, the go-to option there. Still have Okoro in the mix. Maybe he can figure it out. So you have options now. I love Jerome too. I think he's a guy who's probably been underutilized in the league as well. So you just give yourself options at that spot where they were so weak last year. And I almost knew from the start that was going to be their downfall. They just didn't have enough there. LeVert coming back, it's a fine contract. We'll see if he can start to find where that spot's going to be for him on this team, because I think it was tough to put him at the wing there. And then, the biggest thing for this team is going to be Mobley. Like Mobley and Allen, of course, struggled in the postseason too, but Mobley had to take some strides offensively last year that he didn't do into the postseason. Like the 3-point shot's not quite there still. Where he's going to get his offense and his scoring from isn't always an obvious, thing for them night in and night out. So a lot of it's going to be his growth. Mitchell being back, Garland being back together for year 2, I think only points in the right direction. As much as I question that wing spot for them, I am still surprised they went down in the first round, though. I mean, this was a team with a top 3 net rating. This is one of the best defensive teams in the league. This was a real rock solid team all regular season. I know there'll be teams sometimes that are regular season beasts and then the postseason fizzle out fast, but I'm surprised that's what this team was last year. So as far as what they could do, I thought they did a lot. They gave themselves options, but those, 2 positions of Mobley and what they'll actually get from that wing spot are still questions coming into this year.
I mean, we were surprised too. Like top of the list of folks that were surprised. It was definitely us. I mean, we highlighted some of the things that kind of could go wrong in areas of concern, and a lot of those did kind of come to fruition. But the extent to which is just surprising. Like, you're right. Like, I think Mobley's growth is going to be one of the biggest things. Obviously, having more space is going to be beneficial. I saw in terms of contact stats, Basketball Index does contact stats, right, of how much spacing you have around them. Garland, I think, was 29th. They were doing it by position. So your second minutes leader, how much spacing does he have around him? Well, out of all starting guys, it was 29th. And Mitchell was 30th, right? Like there just was not space for these guys. And you look at Mobley throughout the postseason even. Mobley was second on the team in passes per game. Like he was getting involved. He was getting that ball in the short roll like we expected, but he just wasn't productive in those spots. He only averaged 2 assists per game, 3.8 potential assists. And to me, that just screams he's not catching the ball at an advantage, right? Like even though he is that outlet for when they would trap the guards, he's not getting it in a great position where he's able to capitalize and find those cutters. And the offense just really, really bogged down. And then, of course, the worst stat of them all, which was he averaged 0.08 points per possession as a roll man. Now, I know NBA.com tracking stats can be a little funky, and I'm pretty sure he scored a bucket there, but that was not good. It was objectively one of the weaker points, and I totally agree that his growth is going to be one of the biggest things because he was awesome down the stretch last season. Like the second half of the year, he was averaging nearly 18, 19 points per game. If he was just that player in that next series, it probably changes the outcome.
Was he going to have to become the 5 eventually? Is that what's going to have to happen here?
Justin and I, neither of us think so.
I'm adamant that he needs to be a 4 throughout his career. I think that's just where the league is going. Like, just like Robert Williams is more effective as a defender when he's playing at the 4 and he's able to roam, and you have that kind of big, like, obviously you don't know if the pairing with Allen's going to be forever. There's so much, speculation and stuff like that. And maybe there's a move to add like a high level wing. And that's something that the Cavs need to consider. I think even in those spots, you try to get someone like a Steven Adams, right? Where eats minutes at the center position and, just makes things a little bit easier. And then, Mobley can close at 5. I think he can close at the 5 now. He plays about half of his minutes there. But I think that the league is going towards size and skill. That seems to be the impression of where things are going. I mean, Chet's a 4, Victor's a 4, JJJ's a 4, Giannis is a 4, right? Like the best defenses in the league seem to have these guys at the power forward position. And I certainly think Mobley's going to continue to play those backup 5 minutes, but I think he's a power forward in today's game, similar to the way KG was for you guys.
Yeah, I just kind of come back to the fact that like there's just a lot of roads up that mountain. Like the Steven Adams road is an interesting one, where you still keep a bruiser around, and or just you look for like a stretch 5, someone who can maybe do a little bit of both. But I think like even in a world where you pick up a high level wing, like it just kind of makes sense to have that versatility, to be able to have a big that's good enough to play to play those minutes. And one thing I'll say is I do think some folks are over indexed on the Mobley Jarrett pairing, because like you look at the salary numbers around the league, Jarrett's not making crazy money. Like
no,
20 million's role player money these days. So like, I think one reason people are keying in on it so hard right now is because the Cavs' depth was so very poor that even while Jarrett was having a rough series schematically and in his matchup with Mitchell Robinson, and Mobley was having a rough series dealing with the Knicks' physicality and a gunked up paint, it wasn't like JB had anywhere else to go. Like if you had some functional depth, it gets a lot easier to only play Jarrett, 18 to 22 minutes in a playoff game. And like that wouldn't be below the station of a player that's in that salary bracket. So I just feel like the urgency to move Mobley to the 5, like I think it actually kind of sells you short, especially since, as we've noted, you're probably not getting an equivalent level player at the 3 just because of the way 3s, like if you were to move on from Allen, just because of the way 3s are valued in the league. So like What I would rather do, if you're not so, if I'm running the Cavs and I'm not so sure about the long-term future of the Mobley Allen pairing being a top-end successful lineup that I can run for 30 minutes together in a playoff game, I'm just looking to juice everything around them right now, because that feels like a much more functional and efficient use of resources than just trading or moving on just to move on, just to say you tried something different. Now, if a great stretch 5 becomes available, which there are like 3 of those guys, awesome.
Yeah, the very common 3-and-D center.
Yeah, it's not exactly everywhere. I mean, you got one of them.
Right.
And he's
luxuries.
Yeah, and he's 1 billion years old. So it's one of those things where like I just feel like the Cavs need to chase lineup versatility and give themselves more tape of other things before they make something rash. And that's something I want to ask you about the Celtics, because that's another reason why I'm not so sure about this Porzingis move. Because last year, 2 years ago, the Celtics were able to say, hey, we can go double big and really challenge you with our size, but hey, we can also downshift. We can throw Grant Williams in and be switchier and have a little bit more shooting on the floor. We can play 5 out a little bit more. And obviously Porzingis jumper allows you to still play 5 out, but are you worried at all about them giving up some stylistic diversity, losing Grant Williams, a guy who can guard down and guard up, losing Marcus Smart, a guy who can guard down and guard up moving into this season?
I think it's tough to hate losing Grant in a vacuum when you're replacing him with Porzingis essentially in that front court mix. You're keeping the 2 other guys there. I do think he brought a lot of valuable things, and his shot was super reliable. I still can't believe how they underutilized him last year, but to that point, they underutilized him last year. He rarely played down the stretch, and they still became the 2 seed and went to the East Finals and all the rest. So I think it's tough to say that he's going to be a brutal loss. I like O'Shea Brissett a lot. I thought that was a nice pickup at the minimum to at least fill the kind of role Grant did last year, which was in sometimes, out other times. That gives
Plus
you
he's Canadian, so he's a great dude.
Love him. I covered him in college. I'm thrilled to cover him again this year. So that pickup was nice. You have versatility if Brogdon's healthy, and that's why I think one of the biggest questions going into this year is his health. You haven't heard a ton about where he's at in the recovery. You haven't seen much of him. Not that he's one of those highlight guys that are going to be on social media with the workouts, but
I really want to see Malcolm Brogdon just cooking dudes at the Y, like just absolutely embarrassing folks. That would be really fun.
No, but he was great last year, and he shot exceptional. You thought he would playing off the Jays, and he did. The 1-6 man scored almost at will. The one thing that blew me away about him, and I think a lot of people like that move, and it worked out well until he got hurt, was that a lot of guys have like shooting slumps during the year, right? They have the ups and downs. They'll have that hot stretch. They'll go ice cold for a little bit. He just shot well every game the whole way through. And he had a few bumps in the road in the postseason, but through the regular season, he just kept shooting well. It was like every game he was 7 for 14 or 10 for 13, and he'd just be great. And I think his defense has slipped. There's no doubt about it. I think the contract's probably a little bit high, but they're eating that. And if you have an owner who's willing to eat that, that's a luxury. So he'll help you go 2 guards, Jalen and Jason at the 3 and the 4, and then a center out there. And of course, as you said, Porzingis can stretch the floor out too. There are a lot of things Porzingis does that I think are a luxury offensively that I think are going to continue to really pressure teams. One thing I hear most about the Celtics around the league, and more often than not, it's very positive, is that they have tough shot makers. And now you add a third guy who's just capable of pulling up from near half court, or hitting those little 15 footers, or even posting up at a high level like he did last year. So he's going to be another pressure point for defenses. My question isn't as much about the lineup flexibility and those sort of things, or the depth. It's about how the main players utilize each other. I mean, you have 3 massive usage guys. You have pretty much 4, your top 4 players aren't phenomenal playmakers. I thought Smart was the best passer on this team, and you lost him. And Tatum's still growing in that sense, but have 3 guys who really need shots, who really need to get to their spots. And you really don't have that great organizers we've talked about with this team for a while to get them there, to prevent turnovers. I think White's exceptional at that, but is White going to have the ball more than Tatum and Brown do? Probably not. So that's my biggest question for the offense coming into this year, is just how it all functions.
Yeah, the individual talent is obviously really high for Boston, and we'll see how they're able to interact with one another, and if they're able to provide the kind of support that we receive from Zoom. Support for this podcast and the following message comes from Zoom. 500,000 businesses connect using Zoom, a single platform for phone, chat, workspaces, events, apps, and video. Zoom enables real-time collaboration for teams around the globe. Zoom, how the world connects.
I'm sleepy, and that one caught me off guard. Congratulations, buddy.
Bobby, I got to ask you. I agree. Like, I think swapping Porzingis, having him come in instead of Grant Williams, that's an upgrade. I thought it was really smart that you pointed out how he's going to impact the team on the defensive end, because I think people primarily focus on the offense with him. I do agree that that's going to be an upgrade for him. I'm interested to see how he plays with Robert Williams. To me, my biggest question, and why I feel like Boston got a little bit worse overall, is one, the leadership component that you lost with Marcus Smart. You need to see who's going to step up and fill that void. I also felt like one of the biggest problems for Boston and why they've been so inconsistent the last couple of years has been playmaking. Like, I feel like they have had a playmaking deficit, someone that can organize everyone and make them more than the sum of their parts. And Marcus Smart, I don't think he was good enough in that role, but he was also kind of their main organizer out there on the court. And when you lose him, and you're really only replacing him with Porzingis in terms of guard support, I worry about the Celtics playmaking. What level of confidence do you have? Because even if Malcolm Brogdon's healthy, like, that's still a guy that was already there. Do you kind of foresee someone stepping up in that role? Is there something I'm kind of missing in this mix?
Yeah, it's White. I love Derek White, and what still stinks most about that East Finals is his legendary moment, and it really would have been up there with the great Boston sports moments, the tip in. Just gets forgotten, and he was so great last year. 500 threes for him last year, shot nearly 40% between the regular season and playoffs. He was awesome, and like, his turnover assist ratio is incredible too. He's a relatively low usage guy, but he'll put up like 3-4 assists in a game and average 1 turnover. So I think they're really relying on him to make a leap next year. All the different analytics and catch-alls like Raptor and all that, I think, speak really highly of him. And a lot of times late in games, he wouldn't be out there because they'd put Smart and Brogdon out there. I was looking at some film of stuff he did. Like, I do think there's some potential for him to have that little 2-man game with Tatum. He's an exceptional screener, great playing off the ball, and he hit his shots last year too. So I do think, this team's biggest issue really from a playmaking and offensive execution standpoint, because they were the number 1 offense last year, right? During the regular season, is crunch time. And if you look at the numbers, it is really interesting. And I think this is probably the best argument in favor of getting rid of Smart, was that Smart would take the most shots for this team in crunch time. Like, crazy. Teams would sell out on Brown and Tatum. The ball would, funnel to Smart, and he would take a 3. And, he's not the greatest shooter in the world for all the other strengths in his game.
But he had that dog in him. You can't deny that.
He did. And, for that reason, too, it was tough to take him out of games. Even Ime really struggled with that. I think, there was only really one memorable moment that year where he left him on the bench late in a game. So you don't have to play him anymore because he's gone. And I think that is probably something that they were intrigued by, too, in making that shift. And Ime said this a lot, too. You don't lose a ton going from Smart to White. The pick and roll numbers are just a tiny bit worse. White was all defense last year. He's not the defensive player of the year. He's not guarding 5s, but exceptional at guarding the wings. In fact, during the finals, I thought he guarded Curry much better than Smart. I think he's better with some of those quicker guards because he's a little bit quicker. He's also, in terms of like the physical point at which they're in their careers, I think White's still a little bit closer to his prime than Smart was. So again, calculated risk. I think it was a good move saying we have 3 really good guards. We have 2 centers right now, and one's usually injured and one's a little bit older. So let's move one of those guards over to, into an all-star level center. And they got 2 first-round picks out of it, which is, I think what everyone was looking at saying, what the hell?
1 first-round pick in 47 seconds.
Yeah. True. I like Jordan Walsh a lot, though.
Yeah.
They found a good guy in the second round.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you. It's funny hearing you talk about the playmaking. Kind of makes me think of a Cavaliers discussion, because for all the things they did really well in the offseason, one thing they didn't really do was address the rebounding. They didn't. They added Strus and Niang. Niang's never been a good rebounder for his position. Strus is gravitated around average for his position, and obviously, that was probably the loudest headline from the series was that they just got pulverized on the defensive boards. And Justin and I were talking through that, and I kind of came down to listen, if the guys we have don't get better at rebounding, going and chasing a rebounding specialist is not going to save us.
Right. You want Drummond?
Yeah.
No, I want Reggie Evans. I want to see what he's up to. Let's get this going.
If it takes a ninth man rebounding specialist to help shore up the boards, this team is not going to make it as far as we want them to. And do you kind of feel that way about the playmaking? If Marcus Smart has to be here for us to have a functional offense, then what we have just isn't going to work right.
It's Tatum. He got better at passing out of double teams, but what are you doing after them? Are you still moving? Are you really, are you still active and involved after that point? I don't think he was great with that. The turnovers in big spots with him can be maddening. And, this is where I get to the coaching a little bit too. I think Tatum's season, which was obviously sensational, highest scoring ever, first team, defense took a little bit of a hit, but it's still strong on that end. From a playmaking sense and what they're doing offensively, they didn't work the ball as much last year. You saw it early when they were 21-5, where they just had these great layers of playmaking, and you can really just tell, even though I'm sure some games against the Cavs where the ball is just really zipping around with this team, and they're capable of doing that. But I think, and I understand it, but it does drive me crazy. They wanted to just fire up a three a lot of times because there's a thinking that if you get an open shot quick and you fire it away, you're not going to turn the ball over. You're going to get a shot up. It's probably a pretty decent look. And they were just 5 bombs away last year. And Tatum too, the name I heard a lot last year was Lillard. Lillard would take those long threes early in the clock, hit them, stretch the defense out, and then there'd be a lot of space for other guys to operate because the defense is just keying in on him so much. But when he's not hitting, and a lot of last year he wasn't, he'd go on these massive cold stretches. When his mindset at the point of attack was just bombs away, 3-pointers, it just killed me because, he is a great driver. He can get in and pass out of the lane. I think he is a talented playmaker when he's locked into that. But between his own lapses and I think some of the change in coaching emphasis last year for things he was doing, it just impacted him in a negative way, I thought, as a playmaker. Brown, that's the tough thing in giving this $300 million deal is the playmaking's really not there, and it's not there in a way where you probably just aren't going to see it be there, into the future, which is fine if he's going to be that finisher. But, the ball ends up in his hands a lot of the time into the second units. And the second unit really struggled when he was leading it last year just because of the, playmaking deficiencies he has. So, again, every team's going to have a weakness. And this offense, it's not like they finished 20th and they were really struggling to score last year. It was just those little moments, especially late in games, where this offense that was historic to start the year really lapsed. And yes, that does go back to your best players. It goes back to Tatum, who, watching him start 1 for 13 in that Philly game 6, it was things just really, if they lost that game, who's been, the most scrutinized guy in the league this offseason, like Harden or, whoever it might be. Tatum would have been the conversation all offseason if he went out shooting the way he was in that game 6 before he turned it around in a big way. And, listen, I'm a Tatum believer. I really think he can be the guy that leads this team to a championship. But again, the urgency to improve at that spot, the consistency, I do get worried about the coaching here a little bit, just because when you looked at what they did last season and where they finished and things Tatum did, I think the coaching, Joe would have been like, yep, this is exactly what we wanted. And, we had some bad luck and injuries and all the rest. Again, he got injured on the first play of Game 7 against the Heat, which is a valid excuse. But again, how many more years do you have of those excuses? The roster around him is going to deteriorate a little bit now that Brown's making $50 million a year, and Tatum in short order would be making $50 million a year. So can they keep White around at that point? Is Porzingis still around at that point? That's why these guys need to really improve their weak points now, because the supporting cast won't be as good in a couple of years.
How much does seeing, like, I don't know about if you felt this way, but watching a guy like Jokic, just rumble through the playoffs and just kind of realizing, like, we're probably not going to have someone that good. Like,
right. Think of the difference between Tatum and Jokic.
Yeah. So like, if we're not going to have someone that good, our 1 through 5 are going to have to be amazing together. And our best player is going. They don't have to be better, but they have to be able to put together a series as good. And that's a big ask, Yeah. And it does, I feel like, add a little urgency to the Tatum agenda a little bit.
Oh man, if they won that game 7, it would have been Nuggets in 5 at best. Like, the Nuggets would have smoked them. And that's a problem right now, because they're going to be back again this year. And I do think the East is relatively weak. Heat lost a lot. They really did. Bucks.
We'll see if they add a lot
shortly. Yeah, we'll get into that shortly.
So yeah, I mean,
Miami got worse. Boston got worse. Like, the East sucks, man.
Yeah, I know. So it's tough seeing what the Nuggets are doing right now, because they're a machine. But again, the thinking is be in the mix, get some luck. Maybe the Nuggets aren't there when you get to the finals, and see how it goes. But again, that does have to be that urgency to improve internally and be connected, as you said, Carter, because they don't have that machine offensively that's able to do like everything the way Jokic is, or LeBron is at his best, or whatever other name you want to throw at the upper echelon of the league. And Tatum's right there,
right on the border, but I think he's right on the border, but he's not there.
Right. He's just enough below Curry and Jokic and Giannis and those types, right?
Yeah. And Tatum was the guy when we did our Bucks preview that I said he's probably the one that could bridge the gap, like to make up for a bit of the playmaking deficit. Because if he starts to play more as kind of, that point forward at times and provide that supplemental playmaking on a consistent basis, I think that's going to make them more reliable. Because you're right. Like, Boston did have the best offense. And this is one of those times where, the averages are what they are. I get it. But at the same time, if you don't have high level playmaking and you're not able to generate good shots, like, eventually you get tired. Eventually you get a little bit out of the rhythm, right? Like, I never liked the Daryl Morey. Well, yeah, we missed 27 threes. And
that's who they are now.
Yeah, the law of percentages, right? Like, no, I get that it's a high quality shot, but you also have to factor that these are human beings out there, and you need to be able to, when you're not in a groove, get some easy buckets, get some high quality looks, get guys comfortable, so that once they are taking those shots again, they're going to have a higher likelihood of going down. And I agree with you. I think Jason Tatum, that's the real kind of internal opportunity for growth with Boston, because if he becomes a more consistent playmaker, I do think that moves the needle for him and kind of calms some of the concerns that I've had. I mean, obviously, concerns I have for Boston, I'm hoping that things go poorly for you guys, because, the more things that go poorly for these other teams that we discussed, the better it is for the Cavs.
Also, I hate the Celtics.
Well, I mean, there's that whole part
that goes
of this
without
too.
saying, though.
Yeah, that is implied. But let's get into kind of where you see the Eastern Conference, because you said you feel like it got a little bit worse. It's not super strong. I don't know if I totally agree that it's not strong, but it certainly is interesting. I mean, the team we didn't even talk about yet is Philly. That is in a little bit of disarray. How would you rank the top 6 of the Eastern Conference? So the teams you feel are most confident that they're going to miss the play-in.
Oh, obviously the Celtics are in that mix. I think you look at the Bucks.
But where? I need rankings. I need things from you.
I think the Celtics come in at 1 because of the amount of guys. You could sit down Brown for a game and still have Tatum and Porzingis and win more often than not. I think you have a second unit that can fill in if guys need to sit down and win. And that's the key to the regular season. It's why they were so great last year too, is that they could be missing a guy and everybody else would step up and win games. So I have next to no concern about them in the regular season. They're going to win a ton of games. I think they'll be the 1 seed. The Bucks, let's see who's healthy. Let's see who's there game in and game out. Like, I think their supporting cast is really starting to look a little bit unreliable in terms of how often they're available. So, I lean toward them as the 2, but, Middleton's gone for a stretch again next year, and I think they're in a tough spot, even though they finished 1 last year without him for a while there. Like, I think they're going to have to be careful with the amount of games that they play, guys. So I'll slot them in at 2. 3 is interesting. Like, that would be where you'd put Philly if you felt confident that they were going to be that full mix. But after what I saw from Harden waking up, pulling out my phone this morning, I don't feel great about him being there, or at least engaged. So I'm going to have to drop them down below home court, at least for right now. And, given what the Cavs net rating was last year and their regular season success, along with getting some other bodies in there, I'll throw them in at 3. 4,
hell yeah. Pander away, Bobby. Thank you.
4, I love what the Nets have. Not Nets, the Knicks have.
We were about to launch into another podcast because some people seem to feel like the Nets are going to be awesome. I'm like,
Justin is the world's preeminent current Nets hater. I don't know why you feel so strongly about them.
I honestly, I don't know why I feel so strongly.
They were very bad after the trades.
Thank you. That's I feel Bobby, like everybody has just completely overlooked that.
Do you want to know how passionate Justin is about this for no reason? You weren't even talking about them.
No, he did. He said Nets. He said Nets.
Yeah. He said the word Nets.
And it almost launched me.
He's going to talk about a team cutting down the Nets later, and you're going to talk about Mikal Bridges on-off numbers.
Defense is slipping, my friend. Continue.
I feel so down on the East as a whole that I still got to put the Sixers in that mix of 4 or 5 right there. So
you have them above the Heat right now?
I'm going to get to the Heat. So let's throw the Sixers at 5.
Okay.
I'm going to put the Heat by default at 6, but where we're sitting today with the Lillard deal incomplete and maybe not happening, this roster's bad. And I said it all year last year, and so maybe I'm just still so biased against the Heat. Like, I don't get them. I don't get their success. I don't get the whole Butler thing. I don't know how they ended up in the finals again last year. Blew my mind. They lost Vincent, Strus. Maybe Martin comes back down to earth. We'll see.
I like Martin.
They're a paper thin team. Like, the depth's not there. They're so good at developing the undrafted guys and the whoever they're bringing in year out. And I know Jovic is catching a lot of hype, and I've actually liked what I've seen from him in summer league.
I like Jaquez.
Yeah, Jaquez looks like a great fit there, but without seeing it, it's hard for me to call them a home court. I mean, they were the 8 seed last year, and they lost much of that group. So a lot of unproven guys here. They're an older group that doesn't play a lot of games in general, too. Lowry's still heading in the wrong direction. Butler doesn't play a ton during the year. They're going to be in that bottom half of the East again, I think. And, playoffs are a different game, and they're going to be that team again, I'd have to imagine, with Spoelstra coaching and Butler doing what he does that time of year. But they're the 6 at best to me, at least from a regular season standpoint here. So those are my top 6. Look out for Indiana. Love their roster. They were the 6th seed last year before all the injuries struck. I think they're going to take a big step this year. The Hawks, I think, figured some stuff out. Logjam in the front court. I think they'll probably be fighting along that 6-7 line too.
Don't the Hawks and Bulls feel like the two ugly teams that no one wants to like, that are we're just gonna have to keep acknowledging them? They just have
enough talent. Yeah, Young's there, DeRozan's there in Chicago. Those are regular season driving forces that are gonna keep them in that mix. But
and the Hawks also just come up in Siakam talks too, right? So that would obviously move them.
Right, that would help too. Yeah, Raptors feel like they're gonna drop out this year. They have the worst point guard situation in the league. Losing Van Fleet for nothing's a killer, and man, did they just capsize late last year. I don't know much about their new coach, so I'm not feeling great about them coming in this year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Magic are a team that I think could maybe step into that spot in terms of the top 10. They were pretty strong last year before they decided to tank late.
Yeah, I think Indy's a good shout. I think that's a good roster. Adding Bruce Brown is really smart, and
I like that a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, like they just got guys that I really like, and they were winning last year, as you said, right? Like they had a winning record when Halliburton was in the lineup. So
They found a four. You know, they were playing Neesmith at the 4 year ago. Now they got Obi Toppin. So I like that
yep,
team. Good coach.
yep.
Halliburton's like
Oh,
I'm as high as them.
Obi's going to be good in like a pace and space run, like spread pick and roll type offense.
Oh, that
like
team's gonna fly. Yeah.
yeah, he's going to be fun there. And I agree with you. I think Miami's roster is worse than last year. They still might win more games in the regular season than they did last year just because they were so injured. But to your point, these are old guys that don't play every game, right? Like Jimmy's going to miss time, Kyle Lowry's going to miss time, and if a Dame trade does materialize, I'm going to be really curious to see like what goes
that
out.
Changes everything. Yeah.
Can I sneak a Raptors take on after you're done?
Yeah, you absolutely can, especially if it's Raptors slander. But like if a Dame trade does materialize, I'm going to be curious to see how much shooting goes out in that, right? Like, because if it's Tyler Hero and Duncan Robinson, well, you already lost some shooters this offseason to begin with. Like, you're really, really banking on Caleb Martin being able to shoot in that scenario. And obviously, Dame's going to bring it to the table, but that doesn't bring spacing around him because he's going to be the one with the ball in his hands most of the time. So I'm curious to see what it is. I think even if he's there, right, like Dame misses time in the regular season. I don't know if they're going to be a home court team even with Dame, and that totally different. Once again, once they get to the postseason, they'd be in that mix. I would not want to play that team. But in terms of the regular season, between the adjustment period, between the games those guys are probably going to miss, I wouldn't expect them to be a home court team.
I agree. And on the Dame front, I wanted to sneak this on here. Throwing out some of the offseason posturing from Dame's camp, why shouldn't the Toronto Raptors trade Scotty Barnes for Damian Lillard? Why wouldn't he be in the he be in the package? Like I listened to Sam Vecini and Adam Spinella to kind of run through all the potential Dame destinations, and the Raptors kind of felt like one of the only teams that really like could conceivably make an offer given the timeline of the other best players on their team, and frankly how they seem to view their core pieces. Like, you can make jokes all you want, they really like their guys by all reports, and they really think that they are just a few structural changes away from being a great top of the East team again. Why shouldn't they, if they believe that, make a push for Dame Lillard?
I don't think they do believe that. Like, if they don't, like, the weird thing about the Siakam thing is Siakam reportedly, wants to stay there. He wants an extension, and the Raptors don't want to give him that. Like, they don't want to pay him that top dollar. I think a lot of it's posturing because this is going to be something that needs to be blown up. Like, I just, like, if you make that move, I don't think Dame and Siakam wins you a championship. Like,
I think Dame, Siakam, OG is Pirtle is a heck of a foursome. And would put them in competition with the top four in the East. And if you're there, you're close enough.
Yeah,
I guess. I think they should just go young and build.
I also just
Scotty
don't believe in Scotty that much. I feel like he's such a weird player.
Sophomore slump. I wonder if the values, like, would that be enough to really move Portland on a trade? I think know.
I think if you're looking, like, the thing that is interesting with Portland is, of course, like, they don't like the Miami offer, right? Because the best young player they can get is Hero, who, like, they have that archetype already. Toronto doesn't have quite the draft capital that Miami does, but they have some. They can send out some picks and some swaps. And Barnes is a heck of a better prospect than anything Miami is sending, even if you're skeptical about him. And I don't think
you feel good about their picks too.
Yeah, and I don't think that he is a guy like who is going to clash with the existing members of their roster. He kind of does different stuff than Scoot would, does different stuff than Jeremy Grant does, different stuff than Simons does. I just feel like that fit. If you're looking to take a swing on another top level talent, like, and get some draft compensation, I actually think it's the best potential market offer on the market. But it just requires Portland to go the other direction than what we thought they'd be going. But, like, I don't know. I just feel like Lillard makes their roster make a lot more sense. and
I like
kind of
the
everything
take.
slots in.
Yeah, especially where they're so bad at guard right now. I can't believe they're going in this year with Schroeder at that spot. It's
They might
awful.
go in
But
with Barnes, which I'm
yeah,
not
right.
so
Yeah,
sure
no,
about either.
he
I
should
don't
have the
really think
ball the
he's a point
most.
guard.
I don't either. I think, like, I think that's basically going to go how Giannis at the point went for Milwaukee. Like, develop some skills. It's really ugly, but eventually we're just going to move him to the 4, and he's going to like fill that Siakam role, and we need to go out and get ourselves a point guard. Like that's how this goes. And
It's a good point. I'm stunned there aren't more teams in on him because of the contract. You have him for so long. Like, forget about them. I'm not going to play and this and that. Like, yeah, Toronto's tricky. Like, maybe he would be really pissed off going, north of the border there. It doesn't seem like a lot of guys want to play for the Raptors. But Brooklyn, like, he was even on IG Live saying, like, yeah, Bridges, Brooklyn, like, that's a spot I'd go. But now all of a sudden it's just Miami. Like, I think Brooklyn should get in on this. There are
I don't
teams
think
that I
Brooklyn
think
should get in on it. I don't think they have a player of, Siakam. I don't think they have a core as good as Siakam, OG,
I agree.
They have a lot of
Hurdle,
Suns.
Gary
They have a lot
Trent
of Suns
Jr.
pick though. Like, there has never been draft picks more of a sure thing than those future Suns picks that they have, because the Suns they're not going to have picks. These guys are older. Aside from Booker, they don't have any depth. They're up and coming guys. When this whole little big 3 thing that they're doing is done, it's done.
I get that.
Horrible.
I just like whatever they're going to have to give up player wise to get a trade like that over the end.
So this might be crazy, but I think Portland should like Simmons coming back.
I think that's
There's
a bridge
just
too
nothing.
far.
There's just nothing to lose.
I just feel like you're just trading.
There's
for
a
the
difference
Suns
between
picks,
nothing to lose and this is a primary piece coming back. Like when you're matching salary, like that's what he would be, right? Because you're not getting anything else really of value other than picks.
I just take the Heat deal.
I would too.
The Heat are going to give a lot. Like, I don't love the Heat deal, but it's not nothing. Especially
I think it's a perfectly fine deal.
Yeah, and
I'm not.
Hero doesn't help you a ton as a centerpiece, though. So I guess that is the problem there.
I guess it depends. Like you hear that being like a third team kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, like I don't know. I might keep Tyler Hero and move Ann Simons instead, but that's
maybe
neither here nor there.
Oh, yeah, I'm there. I'm there with you, buddy.
Yeah, I'm not a big.
I'm here and there.
Here is pretty good.
Well, I'm glad that Bobby Manning was here with us. This was a lot of fun. A lot of I'm excited to see what next season looks like. The Cavs-Celtics games were just awesome last year. Almost every one of those went to overtime. Cavs won a bunch of them, which made it even more fun.
You had the Grant one. That was really fun.
The Grant Williams one will forever
make them both.
Yeah, that will forever be a highlight. And now we got Celtics killer Max Strus coming in to get you. So that'll be a lot of fun.
Can I sneak this in before we get out of here? 1 year in, was the Mitchell deal the right move?
I think so. I think yes.
Go. Yeah, you go. You elaborate first, Carter.
I think yes. I think he had the best season of his career, and the team was really, really, really good. And really, I just think the roster was so strangely constructed and so shallow that it was just really hard to know. Like I spent the entirety of the offseason heading into free agency and the draft saying like, hey, can we just like make this all make sense so we can actually know like a little bit more? Can we knock out the simple stuff so we're not we're not running out a roster that literally has 2+ shooters that can play minutes for them, and no lineup versatility and maybe 6 guys the coach trusts. Like it's just I felt like in practice last season's roster that went into that Knicks series, despite being mostly healthy, just like had so many flaws that it was hard to evaluate. Like so like my real answer is ask me next year. Ask me after a season of a roster that has some depth, that has shooting and complementary and adjustable play styles. Because like all I know is the guy was a top 10 player in the league last year, and we won 7 more games than we did last year, and the team remains young and talented without having to give away the 3 young guys that we love on the roster to get him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I would say yes. Still,
Yeah, for me, I think Darius Garland and Evan Mobley, like kind of as your most inner of the core, when it came to kind of evaluating what you were looking at prior to the trade. I think those guys are good enough that they're ready to overachieve at a young age. And I think getting someone like Donovan Mitchell, getting the increased expectations, getting teams to game plan for you that much harder, dealing with a playoff failure where you're expected to win and you just really get roughed up and it's embarrassing. It sucks. You hate it. I think going through that earlier in the process helps us kind of establish, okay, what type of players need to be around these guys? What type of changes do they need to make, right? And especially in the context of Mobley, how can you develop your game individually within the context of a very good team? I think those type of developmental reps are so important rather than, all right, we're going to just mostly have kind of role guys around you and Garland. We're just going to stretch it out. You'll play heliocentric, like 1-5 pick and roll. You'll both get your stats. It won't translate to the playoffs, but it's going to look really good and you can kind of work on your game that way. I think trying to develop yourself individually within the context of a good team where you do have other stars and you have to figure out that balance, I think that's so much more valuable and it helps make your game more scalable when you talk about team building. So we'll obviously see after this year, and like there's the question Donovan Mitchell, and I personally think that this is probably as good of a situation as you can have for him. And I truly believe that his number one priority is winning. But I think in terms of the development of this team, the trade was absolutely
that's the only reason I ask is because you hate to hear after 1 year though, oh, is he gonna stay? Is he gonna extend that whole thing? Like
if it ends early, then we'll have to we would have to reevaluate. But like the reality is like, I'm not a big Captain Hindsight on this sort of thing. Like unless like I guess if they get to the finals, in every core member of the Cavs plays awesome except Donovan Mitchell. I guess that's when it wouldn't be a good idea. But other than that, it's just so interdependent that it's like, listen, if Mobley never takes the next step on offense, or Jarrett never figures out how to handle the Mitchell Robinsons of the world, and Darius isn't able to put 3-4 really great games in a row together, they were never going to get to a title anyway. So it's like, I to some extent, like, fortune favors the bold. And like, and for a market like Cleveland, it's not like superstar acquisitions are just falling off trees. Like sometimes you got to go get them, and you got to just go get one when they're available, especially in this modern market where every other star seems to be pre-selecting their destination and making a pretty big deal about it that they have to go there. Whereas Donovan Mitchell galloped around a golf course in celebration after the Cavs traded him, by all reports. So, like, I think ultimately, given all that context, I still think it was a worthwhile move, and I probably more so than I did when they made the trade, because Justin and I were Mitchell skeptics. So, like, now that I think about it, I think I'm more resolved that it was a good idea than I was 1 year ago.
Yeah, I agree. Like Mitchell making the leap that he did, like we were hopeful that maybe he could, playing alongside Darius Garland, that was going to be beneficial to him. But they played so well and they had so little spacing. I think it speaks to kind of the creativity that they had. And, obviously not all of that translated to the playoffs. But from a Donovan Mitchell standpoint, he's always going to play shooting guard because his playmaking skills aren't at that point guard level in the NBA. So he's always going to need to play next to a point guard, which means no matter where he goes, he's probably going to be dealing with a small backcourt. And if you're going to have a small backcourt, you probably want to have two guys like Evan Mobley and Jarrett Allen defending and protecting behind you. The fact that Mobley and Allen, the offense was better with them together than either of them individually. Like the fact that Garland and Mitchell worked so well, and it removed kind of the drop off offensively that we saw that 1 year where it was basically, Darius and Jarrett running the entire show. Like all of that was so encouraging. So I'm excited to see what this ends up being next year, because I like the moves, and obviously, rebounding's a concern. But if that's kind of one of your biggest concerns going in, that's not a bad place to be in.
Yeah, we had the defense conversation going in the last year, and it didn't really rear its head at all. They were great defensively.
Yeah, even against the Knicks.
Even against the Knicks, it was just the everything else that was the problem.
It drives me nuts.
That was a shocking series. It really was, man. They just beat their ass.
I prefer depressing. I was shell shocked, man. I was like, what is going on? It was terrible. Terrible.
Yeah, and we had Andrew Claudio on from Knicks Film School last week, and even he said, he's like, yeah, you replay that series, it probably doesn't go 5.
Well, at least you don't have Julius Randle. I guess that's the win you get out of that, is you don't have to deal with that whole thing.
You know what? We are not allowed to make any Knicks jokes. We are not allowed to make any Knicks jokes for a little while. So
Fair enough.
I will
have
pass
to,
on that one.
Second round is when I'm comfortable cracking a few jokes the Knicks way. Until then, I'm going to treat them with their proper respect and bow my head.
Yeah, little tip of the cap, but I will pass on that and instead pass it over to you, Bobby, so you can let the people know what you got going on, what you want to promote before we wrap this thing up.
Yeah, we did a little hard and think today on the Garden Report, so go check that out. CLNS Media, Celtics All Access is where all my reporting is on YouTube, so go over there and subscribe to that channel. Again, Celtics All Access, clnsmedia.com for the writing, and every weekend at bostonsportsjournal.com as well.
Thank you so much, man. Really do appreciate it. Really appreciate everyone tuning in live on YouTube. Make sure you like and subscribe. Click the notification bell so you know when we're going live. If you're listening via podcast and you want to support us, leave us a rating, leave a review, subscribe, unsubscribe, resubscribe, and help cook those books. If you want to be part of Chase Down's exclusive Discord chat, send a screenshot of the review to chasedownpod@gmail.com. However you choose to support us, we really do appreciate it. Make sure you guys are staying safe out there. Until next time, go Cavs.